What if I told you experts now predict the current generation of US children will be the first in history to live shorter lives than their parents? When I first heard this, I was completely stunned. How could this be? And if true, is there a way to reverse this trend? I'm Jason Prahl, and I want to welcome you to the Human Longevity Project. What started out as a 60-minute documentary has now expanded into a 9-part series that will reveal the surprising sources of our dramatic health decline in the last 80 years alone. We'll take you on a journey around the globe to uncover lost wisdom from some of the world's healthiest and longest living people. You'll get a rare glimpse into the lives of centenarians in remote parts of the world and experience what their environment and lifestyle was really like growing up. In addition, we have interviewed over 90 health experts to explain how we've gotten so far off track and what we can do to put an end to this chronic disease epidemic we now face. We'll cover a lot of ground in this series, and you're going to learn exactly what aging is, how to slow this process, and ways you can apply this knowledge today to live a longer, happier, and more fulfilled life. I hope you're ready for a new perspective on longevity. I think you'll find the information in this series collapses the old paradigm of disease management and provides a refreshing new look on health creation. We welcome you to our community and ask for your continued support to spread this message of health. By registering to watch this series, you're joining hundreds of thousands of people who have already said yes to a brighter future. Because of you, someone you know may get the solutions they desperately need from this series. So please hit the share button below, and with your help, we can set a new trajectory for health and longevity in the modern world. I know we can do better. We have to. If you have any questions or comments about this series, please leave them below. From all of us at the Human Longevity Project, we thank you for joining us on this very important mission. Enjoy episode 1.
So we don't need to go into ancient history to think about the changes that really matter for us. So if we just go back to the early 1900s, this was the beginning of the electric light bulb. And prior to that, we didn't really see shift work. And then we move forward a little bit more and we see the development of antibiotics, which changed the world and has saved millions of lives, billions of lives potentially. Then we had the industrialization of our food supply, whereas not that long ago, the bulk of the food that we ate was raised fairly locally. It was consumed rather locally. We had a seasonal variation to it. We didn't always have oranges and watermelons around and stuff like that, in the dead of winter. If we go back just a little bit, when I was born, this was pre-information age. So people watched TV. There were 3 channels when you got up and turned on the TV. And then with the development of the information age, we've seen a dramatic decrease in the amount of physical activity that people do. And then now in the modern information age, we can work from home, order our food to our front door, never go outside, go online and tell our doctor that we have a sore throat and get antibiotics delivered to the front door. We could construct a life where we literally never have any meaningful social interaction. We try to paper over that with social media. And so in a very brief period of time, really in the period of one very long lifetime, or certainly 2 generations, longer lifetimes, we've seen every facet of our lives change in really profound ways and in a larger way than happened in the totality of the rest of history.
The epidemic of chronic illness has not yet spread to developing nations. It is really a problem in modern industrialized world. So the question is, why are autism, ADHD, asthma, autoimmune diseases, allergies, why are these so endemic in modern industrialized world? Why is it that we see so many kids in the United States, in the UK, in Australia with these skyrocketing rates of every chronic illness out there? And the reason why is because we live differently.
When you're looking for the connection between the whys, why do we have such an explosion of chronic disease? Where is it coming from? And you see it's in the last 30, 40, 50 years. Then you look to see what's happened in the last 40, 50, 60 years. Is there anything that's changed that may contribute to the end point result where we're getting sicker, quicker?
Now it's official. The experts in epidemiology have confirmed that in the last few years, life expectancy is not growing anymore, it's regressive. And insiders say it's actually regressive since 1997, but the official numbers is now in the last 2 years, it's going downhill rapidly, meaning that many people my age will actually see, and maybe your age also, you're significantly younger, but many of you will outlive your own children. We have a crisis coming that needs to be acknowledged.
We have more scientists, more doctors, more therapists, more gyms, more chiropractors, more osteopaths, and more nutritionists per capita than we've ever had, and we're the sickest people we've ever been.
If you look in the index of medical textbook that a medical student would see in their program, and you look for health in the index of that textbook, you're not going to find anything. There's no definition of health in most medical textbooks. The primary focus is on disease.
Up until really very recently, people had every reason in the world to think that health and disease were a matter either of bad luck, punishment from God, or more recently, the unfortunate scripting in our genetics of just a bad health hand. And so the predetermination was made that I'm going to live a life of chronic disease. My parents had diabetes, Alzheimer's runs in my family, whatever. You hear this all the time. And this is, you know, just echoes of a tired, old, outdated story of health.
We have a healthcare system that evolved in the context of acute problems and was really set up to deal with those. And it does a fantastic job, by the way, of dealing with those acute problems. If I get hit by a bus, I definitely want to go to the hospital. But it fails miserably when it comes to these complex chronic problems.
And that is the next barrier that we have to overcome in the search for longevity, is looking, how do we understand how to keep ourselves healthy over the long term? And that's not something that the medical system has ever really thought about. That wasn't really in their remit. And the truth is that it's probably not going to be created by a medical system. It's going to be created mainly by patients, and patients being inspired by content, by providers, by each other.
The more you learn, the more you realize that we've allowed ourselves to become incredibly dependent on the healthcare system in general, on pharmaceuticals in general, and have allowed the industry to take enormous advantage of the population, the payer system, the taxpayer, and it's gotten way out of control.
So we are currently in a situation characterized by the fact that almost 10% of the pediatric population in America is being treated with psychotropic medications. We have reports through the NHS of, in Scotland actually, of a 1-year-old baby, being medicated psychiatrically. This is a possible outcome of a refusal to acknowledge that something is wrong.
We treat the body as if it's a bunch of different parts, and we go to the doctor for that part. We have a headache, we go to the head doctor. The problem is our headache might be caused by what we're eating, or by our gut flora, or by a nutritional deficiency, or by a toxin, and we don't have a way of mapping that because the way that the science is shifting so fast, we haven't caught up clinically.
It's estimated that over 60 million Americans currently suffer from an autoimmune condition, and more than 70% of adults across the US have already been diagnosed with a chronic disease. And perhaps what's most shocking is that by the year 2030, it's estimated that nearly half of Americans will be diagnosed with cancer at some point in their life. Things are getting worse, and the medical system doesn't appear to be equipped to handle chronic disease. So before we can address the question of longevity, let's explore the aging process and try to get a better understanding of what aging actually is.
It depends on how you live your life. For some people, aging will be the passage of time. For some people, aging will be the accumulation of wisdom and experience. And so it really depends on what side of the fence you're on. But we can define it biochemically, by looking at lab markers and looking at novel blood work, or we can look at it as a human experience, and the human experience is really all about experience. And so aging is essentially an accumulation of those experiences, and it's really an accumulation of wisdom as well.
Aging is the process of where we let go of flow in the body. So things start to stiffen, become stagnant, become more rigid.
How I define aging is it's a lack of playfulness, evaporating out of the body as well as the psychology. So for me, what keeps us young, the fountain of youth, is playfulness.
Aging is a process where you just get older. You shrivel up and die.
It's a loss of the ability of our cells to adapt to their environment quickly and efficiently.
The health of your cells pretty much determines the health of you, like from the cells of your brain to the cells of your digestive system. It all boils down to cellular health.
From a human health perspective, when you're looking at aging, you're looking at the ways that the human body is able to sustain itself despite the fact that cells are dying at a more rapid rate. How can we continue to adapt even though we're getting older and moving closer towards death?
Well, I think with aging, what we have is we have a state in which you go into more of a catabolic than anabolic state. So instead of your tissues regenerating and renewing at a healthy rate and your mitochondria being efficient, those systems all become impaired. So then your mitochondria becomes less efficient, you can't produce much energy, you don't have as much cell division, you become more vulnerable to disease, you're more prone to inflammation, you can't modulate your feedback loops, and then that leads to every disease becoming at greater risk to develop as these processes take place.
Over the years, there's been lots of different theories about what kind of layer of physiology is the true source of illness, of symptoms, of disease, of aging itself. Well, in recent years, there's been some really breakthrough research that is now zeroing in on the mitochondria as the most upstream system.
My perspective of aging, it comes from a more mitochondrial perspective. If we speak about mitochondrial aging, then we are looking at the increased number of mitochondria that's getting damaged as you get older. And when that happens, a lot more cells also die in the process because mitochondria regulate the apoptosis or cell death. Now, there is a balance or threshold point by which this happens. They say it's around mid-40s where everything tilts to the aging process. But in terms of mitochondrial aging, it's essentially the accumulation of all the mitochondrial mutations from oxidative stress, and then that translates to senescence and cell death. Now, this is reflected in the organs that go first in aging that are affected by chronic diseases. For example, the brain, the heart, the kidneys, the endocrine organs, or those that produce hormones, and your muscles. They go first because these organs have very high mitochondria, numbers of mitochondria in them, and they have a very high energy demand, but they have a very low energy reserve. So when the mitochondria start to go, these particular organs start to go.
All right, here's where things get a little technical, but stay with us because understanding a bit about mitochondria will be helpful in the rest of the series as we explain how lifestyle factors such as diet, exercise, stress, and sleep impact things like cellular health and genetic expression, and ultimately the aging process. And don't worry, we'll unpack these concepts along the way.
One of the 5 top theories of aging is called the mitochondrial theory of aging. Mitochondria are these ancient bacteria. About 2 billion years ago, the cells that are our cells merged with these mitochondria. And we like to tell ourselves, oh, we harness them as a power source. And they like to tell themselves, we found a petri dish and we're still in charge.
So within all our cells, we have a powerhouse that makes energy called the mitochondria. And basically, every time we eat foods, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, we make glucose, and then glucose combines with oxygen that's circulating as we breathe, and then we start to make something called ATP, which then provides us energy to function. And the higher mitochondria, the higher functioning your mitochondria is, the more ATP you have.
But if they are weak, they are stressed, they cannot turn food and air into energy, then it's going to be harder for you to do what you want. And that's why mitochondria matter for more than just aging. If they're happy, you're happy. If they're stressed, you're stressed.
The mitochondria in general, if I will give a description of them, we have about 100 quadrillion of them, or that's 1 followed by 17 zeros. And our human body in an average 70 kilogram male has only about 3.7 times 10 to the 13 number of cells. So imagine that these are bacteria that are inside your cells. Each cell contains an average of about 500 mitochondria, but that's an unfair thing to say because those with very high energy demands would have about 1,000 to 2,000 per cell.
So your mitochondria have their own bacteria level intelligence and their own goals and agendas, which are partly to keep you alive forever because you're a petri dish, but also to make sure you run away from scary things, make sure you eat everything, and make sure that you reproduce with everything else. And those behaviors actually can make you old or they can make you young.
So the mitochondria essentially produce not only energy for you, it's also responsible for the production of what's called the reactive oxygen species, or ROS. Now, reactive oxygen species are signaling molecules at the proper levels, and they signal the nucleus as regards how much energy is being produced. They also signal cell death. So these are very important functions of mitochondria. So we know it only as an energy source, but it does all of these other things that are actually vital for aging and for good health.
Well, it turns out that we actually have an internal antioxidant defense system. And it's not, this whole thing of longevity and resistance to disease isn't a matter of how many vitamin C and vitamin A and vitamin E pills you can pop during your life. It's a matter of, are you doing the things that actually stimulate your mitochondria and your cells to build up their internal antioxidant defense system, what's called the ARE, the antioxidant response element. And interventions like hormesis actually, that's what really builds that system up and makes it more resilient, and what actually reduces oxidative stress at the cellular level in the long run.
Hormetic stress is interesting in that in this day and age, we try to avoid stress so much, or we're told to minimize stress. But interestingly, whether we place a human child, a cat, a dog, a plant in a completely stress-free environment, they don't actually thrive. And so this is true whether we're talking about sunlight exposure or kind of interesting constituents in plants or what have you. It's that stress that actually alerts our body, alerts our system that there's something maybe not quite right. And it may actually be a little bit in the short term negatively impactful on us, but then it causes an upregulation in everything from antioxidant systems to immune response. Within military circles, they like to talk about this with regards to resiliency. So resiliency, the physics equation for it is pretty interesting, but what it describes is that you can test a system and it will become stronger as a consequence of the testing. And so that's really the basis of hormesis.
Yes, we have certain types of stressors, chronic psychological and emotional stress, job stress, relationship stress that can potentially be problematic in the long run. But we're also missing out on certain key types of metabolic stressors that are actually critical to health and longevity.
These things in small amounts actually confer a pretty profound protective effect. So heat, cold, wild plants and other wild foods, sunlight.
And it turns out over time, as a result of millennia of being in that situation, our bodies not only learn to cope with that stress, but actually evolved in such a way that we require those types of stressors in order to be healthy and just for our cells to function normally?
In terms of acute stress, we actually should be able to respond to acute stress. And in order to do that, we produce lots more energy. And in the process of producing energy, we produce reactive oxygen species.
At low level, reactive oxygen species can play a role of different types of mediators, signal transducers. But if oxidative stress is excessive, it causes peroxidation of lipids, damage to DNA, to proteins, and if these damages are not repaired, they accumulate.
The inflammatory response is intended only for acute purposes, but when it's there chronically, then we start developing all the chronic diseases like neurologic diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, diabetes and other metabolic diseases, and even cancers.
So when we say inflammatory disease and free radical and oxidative stress, it is automatically the same when you say this disease is related to mitochondrial dysfunction.
Every chronic illness is linked to the mitochondria now. The chronic fatigue, the cancers, you name it. I mean, it's like the list was small 15 years ago. Now it's like virtually every chronic illness involves the mitochondria.
There is no disease which has nothing to do with mitochondria. I mean, if you see a certain patient with a certain symptoms which remind you of a certain disease, fine. But if something is off, something just doesn't fit the picture of this particular disease, think mitochondria.
So we started to really look at this very, very seriously in the early 90s as to how this would spread to conditions, musculoskeletal problems, cardiac problems, immune-related problems, neurological problems, reproductive problems. So you have endocrine dysfunctions. You have then obviously carcinogenesis and oncogenesis and cancer. All of those can be traced back to aspects of alteration in mitochondrial function.
The first time that there was a connection between human diseases and mitochondrial DNA was made in 1988 when Doug Wallace published his famous landmark paper in Science. In each cell we have hundreds, thousands mitochondria, and inside each mitochondria we have between 5, 10, 15 and more copies of mitochondrial DNA.
The number of good mitochondria versus bad mitochondria is actually encompassed in a word called heteroplasmy. Homoplasmy means you have a lot of healthy mitochondria. Heteroplasmic means it's mixed with some bad mitochondria in there.
Mitochondrial DNA, when mutated, is the basis for mitochondrial DNA diseases. And during the 90s, the number of mitochondrial DNA diseases has literally exploded. The clinical implications is the balance between healthy DNA, also healthy mitochondrial DNA in one cell, and mutated mitochondrial DNA. That means the number of mutated DNA has to reach a certain level when we start seeing clinical symptoms. And whether we see clinical symptoms or not then further depends on the energy demand of the tissue this particular mitochondrion is in. Now, if the task of a tissue is to produce insulin during diabetes, and we don't have energy to do that when we precipitate diabetes. If a major function of the tissue is to think, to have imagination, and we don't have enough energy to do so, well, then you cannot think properly anymore. If a major task of a tissue is to run away, skeletal muscles, and you get the drift, okay, then so it really depends on the function of a tissue which is then impacted. And this is also the reason for that the multitude of symptoms is so hugely diverse.
So what Doug Wallace has demonstrated in his research is that as mitochondrial DNA mutations occur at higher rates in a given tissue, we start to see disease symptoms show up. The more mutations, the more severe the symptoms tend to be in that given organ. So it becomes imperative that we protect our mitochondrial DNA from excessive damage, especially in women.
So there's only one place that baby gets mitochondrial DNA, and that's directly from mom. And that's why it is so imperative that as a society, we are looking after women's health. If we want to ensure that all of humanity is optimized and at its best, we have got to look after that mitochondrial DNA, because that's the lineage that's going to be passed on. The eggs that a woman has today that will become a future baby were actually maturing in her mother's body, and her mother's eggs were actually maturing in her grandmother's body. So when we say lineage, we literally mean the female lineage.
One of the best ways to look at the mitochondria from a metaphorical level is to imagine a city in a blackout. When a city is in a blackout, there is no energy to power up anything. So one of the things that happens is there is loss of law and order, right? So you have runaway cells and you call them cancer cells. There is loss of garbage collection. So you have piles and piles of garbage in there, and you could see that happens in Alzheimer's disease. So these are the things that happen when you have loss of power, or when you have very many defective mitochondria inside the cell that's unable to power itself. As you get older, it has the propensity to produce more and more dysfunctional mitochondria, because the mitochondrial DNA actually mutates very rapidly. The body has mechanisms to get rid of those, but as you get older, those mechanisms also become inefficient. So there's about that window that has been talked about in terms of longevity, where the mitochondria cannot catch up anymore in terms of the mitochondrial biogenesis. And in terms of the number of mitochondria getting dysfunctional and getting destroyed, such that now the body will go into aging and senescence.
And as the mitochondria become worse and worse at making food and air and light into energy, you get older and older. Everyone over age 40 has mitochondrial decline, which means we make less energy from food than we did when we were young. And half of us under age 40 have early onset mitochondrial deficiency.
What I think is causing that is lack of hormetic stress in our lives. And when the mitochondria are weakened by this lack of hormetic stress, think of if you've ever broken a bone and you've got a cast on, what happens after you get that cast off? You notice that all your muscles have atrophied, right? Well, that's what happens to mitochondria inside of your cells when they're not being exposed to hormetic stress. They weaken, they atrophy, and they lose their capacity to produce energy. Now, when that happens, they also lose their resiliency in the face of stress. And it lowers what I call your resiliency threshold, which is this kind of tipping point. It's basically the amount of stress that your body can handle and recover from before it starts to go into various kinds of symptoms and illness and disease and accelerated aging. And as a result of that, you now become much more susceptible to all these types of stressors in the environment, whether it be infections, sleep deprivation, toxins, anything else. And those stressors can now tip your cells into cell danger response mode.
The cell danger response is kind of the newest way, or the newest defined way of looking at how the mitochondria are really functioning to protect the cell. And a lot of the earlier research on damage-associated molecular patterns and damage-associated molecular proteins have led to a deeper understanding that the mitochondria do much more than produce ATP. In fact, they are now seen as the primary cellular defense against viruses, pathogens, and toxins. And some of the work that has been done by researchers like Robert Navio, for example, has clearly demonstrated that extracellular ATP, which originates from the mitochondrial signaling, gets ejected out into the extracellular space. In this extracellular ATP, these extracellular purines are essentially becoming key signaling molecules that will alert neighboring cells to the threat of danger. This process of cell danger response signaling will basically cause the mitochondria to shut down its basic functions as a protective mechanism. The problem with that is if this cell danger response doesn't turn off once the threat is resolved, this leads to dysfunction of the cell and dysfunction of the mitochondria. It's now been established that many chronic diseases, including autism spectrum disorders, are extraordinarily linked to this cell danger response signaling.
It's looking more and more like that problem of the body getting locked into this cell danger response mode maybe underlies many, if not most, chronic diseases.
Many different mechanisms will change in the mitochondria. Methylation will then shift away from DNA synthesis towards more promotion of inflammatory mechanisms. So the mitochondria will actually try to use free radicals to fight a virus or a pathogen. And so vitamin D metabolism shifts, B6 metabolism shifts, purines shift, uric acid shifts. All of these different cellular metabolic processes change when a cell danger response is undertaken. And normally, this cell danger response will appear, and then it will eventually resolve once the threat has been eliminated and the person's health will go back to normal. But what we now understand is that some people, they cannot shut off their cell danger response, and it's stuck on automatic all of the time. And this is believed to be happening in at least one condition, the autism condition. We know that, according to the research of Navio, that the oldest drug in existence, known as Suramin, is able to kind of hit the reset button on this extracellular ATP signaling, which is intricately involved in the cell danger response. And by administering this, micro-dosing this very old drug once every 5 weeks or so, the cell danger response is reset, and all of the clinical parameters of autism is significantly improved. So there's an enormous amount of potential with this therapy.
So if we look at just everything on a cellular level and taking a look at snipping the DNA and correcting for mitochondrial function, etc., it's a very short-sighted view because we are organisms that are built on networks upon networks of organisms in itself.
When we look at the Navio research, for example, the ATP signaling that's happening in the cell danger response is outside of the cell. And so as we study the intricate biology of the cell and the intricate genomics and every little thing, we are forgetting that that cell is existing because it's connected to a network of cells and to the matrix that exists outside of it.
Most recently, bacteria and mitochondria have been shown to actually talk to each other without our knowledge. So whereas before we are only looking at things from our point of control, now we are looking at the point of view of the bacterial sense of control, and we are simply its host.
And as mitochondria is a kind of bacteria, so the question is, who controls mitochondria? Why mitochondria and microbiota share the same characteristic, the same activities in terms of structure, in terms of mechanistics. So we ask the question whether there is a kind of relationship between mitochondria and microbiota.
Certain concepts are actually blowing up our ideas of what's true. Our current theory of disease doesn't match the facts. The microbiome is the greatest example, where we now know that gut flora can be causing cancer. It can cause, and at Cleveland Clinic we have Kara Sang, who's researching the microbiome in breast cancer. We have Stan Hazen, who's looking at the microbiome in heart disease. We have understandings that may be related to dementia or depression or autism or autoimmune disease or obesity or diabetes. And how do we even frame that, right? And you don't go to the rheumatologist with rheumatoid arthritis and they go, well, let me look at your stool test and your microbiome, right? That's not happening yet. It will, and we will get there. And the convergence of some major trends is going to transform medicine and healthcare.
So when you're looking at longevity, you're looking at vitality, and I want my body to be more engaged and alive. What we teach at the Institute for Functional Medicine all the time, you also need to include an evaluation of the microbiome, the bacteria of your gut. This is the organ that controls everything, your microbiome.
The gut is at the center of our health. This has been known for thousands of years by ancient healing traditions, and we're just discovering now. We thought, your poop was just your poop, but now we're understanding that, there are more molecules from microbes in your gut, in your bloodstream, than your own human molecules. So you are literally, far more than just yourself.
The gut is one of the most important part of our body, and it plays a significant role in the immune function. The main reason is one of the most important cells of the immune system, which regulates the immune system, are in the epithelial tissue. I'm sure you know, or many people know, that the 70% of the immune system is in the gut, actually. And so therefore, the communication of the immune system, or cells involved in the immune system, with the environment of the gut, meaning the microbiome and food, is playing a significant role in our overall health.
We still have a lot to learn about how they communicate, how they control and affect our health, before we could actually say, okay, this is what we're going to do in terms of definitively increasing our lifespan, or this is what we're definitely going to do in order to prevent disease.
So when you change your diet and change your microbiome, that changes all your gene expressions. If you get constantly exposed to chemicals, that changes your gene expression, or how your genes activate and turn on and turn off.
Our genes are not actually controlling our biology in the way that's been thought for a very long time. They're not the most upstream thing. Actually, the most upstream thing is the environment.
A lot of people think they're just like dealt this deck of cards that spells doom for them once they test their genetics, and it says they've got whatever. In my case, right, higher than normal risk for type 2 diabetes, or higher than normal risk for prostate cancer. And the fact is that there's a wide variety of things that go way above and beyond just your SNPs. And your markers from a genetic standpoint that influence whether or not those issues are actually going to manifest.
Many people think that a gene, if we have bad genes from our parents, that we're screwed, we're in trouble. But that's not the case, because just because that gene is there and it might be posing a problem, you have to turn it on.
So science has clearly shown now that our genes do not dictate our future. It's our genetic expression that actually makes the difference of who we are at any given point in time. Our genes themselves actually have no function. It's what actually brings them to life that makes the difference.
Your genes don't determine whether you get a disease or not. Your genes determine whether you're vulnerable to getting a disease or not. It's the weak link in your chain.
So as we know, we have nuclear DNA and we have mitochondrial DNA, and they're not the same. Mitochondrial DNA are only maternally inherited. Our nuclear DNA are inherited from both parents. But there's a crosstalk that's happening between how our cells function, how ATP is getting made, and how our DNA is actually communicating, in a sense, to our mitochondria.
We have found lately that there are communication channels between the mitochondria and then and the cell nucleus. So what happens? The mitochondria releases some molecules that go and reach the nucleus and make our genome react to what is happening.
I mean, the reality is that, we have DNA. DNA is like an instruction manual. It's a gigantic instruction manual that is supposed to say, here's how this body is supposed to operate given the circumstances, what you've inherited. But that DNA has to be translated into RNA, and RNA has to be translated into a protein, which is what you actually use. So there can be all kinds of potential problems that are happening in the DNA to RNA to protein translation process that we really don't have a good enough grasp of yet. But we can suspect, based upon the initial research, that environmental factors really do have a role to play in influencing all of these things.
To me, a gene is simply, it's a book to be read. So a gene has a job to do, and we have about 19,000 different genes, and they all do, some do one job and some do multiple jobs. And so if a gene is told that it needs to turn on, then it will do it. And things that will tell a gene to turn on could be infections. It could be your mindset. If you get irritated or pissed off, you're firing a lot of genes to stimulate you so you can take action.
We have, in the late years, a new term in biology has been born, which is called epigenetics. It's from the Greek word epi, which means above, genetics. So someone is born, and most of us are born healthy. There is only one case in 2,500 cases that has an inborn error of due to problematic genes, but the rest 2,499 of us are born healthy. So what we do after our birth, which is epigenetics, is that influence and changes our health, and this is the most important factor.
Your genes are only part of the picture. How you change them or express them through the things you do in your life really make all the difference. And when you look at these gene studies, there's no question that an environmental factor, a diet, lifestyle, nutritional factor plays a role in who you become. The classic example and the best models to study that are twin studies because they share very similar genotypes.
Identical twins have the exact same genetic makeup, yet over time they become very, very different people because of their environments and their lifestyles, the food they eat, the jobs they do, the people they hang out with, the environments and climates they choose to live in. They become very, very different people purely based on their epigenetics.
You know, when you look at twin studies done on smokers and non-smokers, that person looks dramatically different. Now, you know, somebody who's smoking probably, if we dig a little bit deeper, there might be an emotional component to why they're still smoking. And so that could be what's aging them more so than the actual cigarettes might be aging them. So it's really hard to study, you know, human beings the way we would study lab rats or the way we'd study microbes in a petri dish, because there's so many layers of complexity to the human lifespan that it's hard to say it's one particular thing. But we certainly know that they had the same genes, being twins, and the environments and conditions that they were in and the decisions that they made altered how they look and probably how they think and how they function.
So while different factors accumulate and create damage at the cellular or biological level, this causes our cell to multiply. Actually, the stem cells, the mother cells that can multiply and replace older or damaged cell, they have to multiply. But each time they multiply, a part of the outer part of the chromosome, which is called the last part, in Greek it's called telos, last, and part meros, they are called telomeres, they become shorter because the last part is not copied. When the telomeres get shorter, the DNA and the genome, which the genome is the information contained within the DNA and the chromosomes, becomes unstable. So when we have unstable DNA, we are open to diseases or even death, or because the DNA doesn't function well. The shorter our telomeres, the older we are at a biological level.
In terms of aging, one of the indicators that have been given out recently was telomere length. And actually, you know, reactive oxygen species damage the telomeres. So you should take a look at what damages your telomeres first. So that takes precedence over looking at the telomere length itself. So it's a longer view to take a look at the mitochondria first before you actually attribute all of these other downstream changes, like in cancer or in telomere length, to the actual mutations in them, or the decrease in function in them, and shift it more towards how much energy are we providing for the continued maintenance and function of these particular enzyme systems.
Now, the conversation about our telomeres, which is the ends of our genes, was very interesting about a decade ago, where we studied and found they shortened with age. This is something we got excited about, and we understand now it's far more about our environment and lifestyle factors that influence our genes that actually cause them to either shorten more slowly, less slowly, or actually start to reverse in that deterioration process.
Telomeres are maintained by telomerase. You know, it's an enzymatic system that is believed to have a decreased function over time. But why does it decrease function over time? And you could take a look at that. Most probably, there's increased damage from reactive oxygen species and less protection because of a decline in energy production of mitochondria. And besides, older mitochondria, if you do not replenish them enough, will produce reactive oxygen species also that will damage the telomeres further.
So the way of life we do, the diet, the stress, the environment, influence the degree of damage and the degree of how fast or how slow our telomeres shorten.
Our epigenetics, our environment and our lifestyle, the foods we eat, the way we move our body, the people that we hang out with, the things we think, all these dictate our health status at any point in time, and we can change those. We can change our health status at any point in time. We can choose what food we put in our mouth. We can choose when we move our body and how we move it. We can choose who we hang out with, and we choose how much sleep we get and how we think about things around us.
The only thing we're left to conclude is that health, more than anything else, is actually a skill set. And the moment people understand that and really have processed it, the moment I think this concept of personal responsibility, taking ownership, will begin to sink in, make sense, and induce people to action.
We normally only become proactive in our health when there's something wrong with us. And, I think that actually makes sense because sometimes a person's not ready to change their diet or change their bad ways until they're sick and tired of being sick and tired. They have to get to the end of the rope before they make a change. Sometimes that's just the way that it is. But it's a lot more intelligent to say, let's improve our health so that we don't make disease processes able to penetrate into our body. If we did that, we would be able to prevent so many diseases today.
According to a study by Paul Marston from the University of Sussex called Mimetics and Social Contagions, Marston suggests that when faced with a variety of different options, our decision-making ability is to simply go, oh, what is everyone else doing? Great, I'll do that too. And so because of this, we blindly follow the rules from generations past. But the problem is, the world is changing faster than these rules are changing. Today, things change so fast that the rules from our parents, the rules from our society, the rules from our religion often no longer apply.
The way that we are trained in conventional medicine is based on about 300 years of cultural history and scientific concepts that tell us that problems can be fixed through application of force. And if it's not working, do more, force more, apply more to the failures of the initial intervention. And so this is how we have literally half of Americans on psychiatric medications, how we have 1 in 4 women of reproductive age taking antidepressants.
Well, we're really socialized in medicine, in America at least, as patients to think that the doctor has an answer for us and that the doctor also has a bottle with a solution for us or a procedure that will fix us. And so that is misleading.
I can remember one time I went and Googled the term sick healthy just to see what this oxymoron would produce, and I went over to the images, and what you find is all kinds of books and apps and propaganda essentially designed to convince us of this ridiculous oxymoron that we can be sick and healthy at the same time. So you get books like How to Be Sick Well, How to Be Well with Chronic Disease, Live Healthy with Chronic Disease. I mean, craziness. Think about it. By far, the most profitable state, if you're the healthcare industry, to keep a person in is chronically ill. It's second to healthy, third to dead. Dead's not profitable. Healthy's minimally profitable. Chronically ill is a very profitable state to keep a population in.
The majority of the costs in the medical system, $3.3 trillion, is generated after the referral from the primary care doctor. So now you're with an endocrinologist and you're with a gastroenterologist and you're with a hematologist, and all these people are very specialized, very expensive, bill your insurance a lot, the labs are expensive, the procedures are expensive, the drugs are expensive. And so the best way for us to contain the cost, both for the individual, for every payer, for the individual, for business, and for governments, is to go upstream and prevent those things from happening.
For me, the future of longevity is about keeping that ancient wisdom going, but using the best bits of modern science to enhance it. That's where we've gone wrong. We've got modern medicine
getting into conditions that really it doesn't need to get involved with. We should let it concentrate on the stuff that has been life-saving, that has helped increase life expectancies.
We need a lot more humility in medicine. Like, we think we know it all, but I mean, we're just now discovering new organs that we never knew exist. To me, I'm like, that's pretty profound to know that, you know, we've been dissecting the human body for a long time, and we still, you know, are finding new things.
We know so little. I mean, we've progressed a lot, but we still know so little about what is it that makes us, and whether or not we do really own our body, you know, or it's someone else or something else that's actually running us.
We think that we've created some kind of, you know, answer to longevity, but truly it's in indigenous cultures that we see longevity without all these fancy pharmaceuticals and different kind of manipulations to get there. They're living simply, but they're living for a long time.
And truly the things that keep you out of the doctor's office, and that really is the fountain of youth, secret to life, they're not sexy. They're nothing that science is ever going to show us is new. They're the basic things that our ancestors have taught us through the years, and really what we've lost in Western society.
Maybe I've got a couple cool golden nuggets of things I can share clinically that I've done to reverse my health problems and reverse other people's health problems. But what about people that don't have health problems in the first place? What are they doing that we're not doing? I think there's other puzzle pieces out there that we just don't truly understand yet. And if we go study these people before they're gone, we've got a good chance of really setting the tone for the future.
You know, it's funny. We thought the same thing. So we did it. In the spring of 2017, we traveled around the world to find out what we can learn from those who appear to be aging successfully without chronic disease.
There are these pockets of people that are supporting each other, that know each other's families, that have each other's backs.
They're intimately involved with the plants. They're intimately involved with each other. When someone is stressed, when someone's having a challenge, they all band together, they help each other. They laugh a lot, they have fun, they know how to, don't take life too seriously. All these things are important.
Health just seems to happen to these folks in a very natural way. They live in communities. They're in relationships with people. They don't stress out about small things.
My guess would be they're not so attached to being on iPhones and iPads and computers. My guess would be they're not on Facebook trying to prove, defend, get their needs met. And they have a much deeper feeling of acceptance from themselves and everyone that's around them.
They don't think about health. Health is the default option for them by virtue of the way that they choose to live their lives.
Όλοι μας βοηθούσαν αυτοί, γιατί βρισκόμαστε όλοι μαζί παίρναμε τις αποφάσεις, τι θα φτιάξουμε, πού θα πάμε, τι θα κάνουμε, όλο το χωριό.
La collaborazione fra tutti, ti sentisci andare d'accordo, non bisticciare mai, sempre andare d'accordo nelle cose sul lavoro e su tutte le cose. Pace, lavoro e giustizia.
Να σας πω, έχει ιδιομορφία το νησί μας, γιατί δεν φτάνουν ποτέ οι άνθρωποι στα άκρα. Υπάρχει σύμπνοια, υπάρχει αλληλεγγύη, υπάρχει όλα αυτά που μπορούν και συνδέουν τους ανθρώπους και αποφεύγονται οι εχθροπραξίες, όλα αυτά.
Cantare te, cingano, sono giovane. Mi sembra giovane.
Si sente.
Non lo so neanche io.
Pura vida es sentirse uno bien. Pues es pura vida es sentirse bien en todo, no tener problemas, no tener nada, y eso es pura vida. Me siento pura vida.
What are all of these people doing? They're all living very similar lifestyles. And what they're doing is they're living on this planet the way we evolved to live on this planet.
Io conosco solo i cibi naturali. Anche ora, se potessi, Mangerei solo quello che prenderei io in campagna e mangerei il pane buono che non esiste più. Niente supermarket. Elettricità non c'era dappertutto, c'era solo nei grossi centri. Nei piccoli paesi c'era la candela, il lume, e quindi tramontare a letto. Non c'era certo televisione, non c'era la radio, non c'era niente.
Ah, sí, sí le gusta, pues, pero veo una vueltilla y ya volvería, ya andando un ratito, no, ya yo me siento bien. Pero cuando voy allá a la finquita que tenemos, agarro un machete y ando trozando matones ahí. No pienso en nada, nada que lo que ando haciendo, la mente no está alcanzando cosas de más allá, no. Está en lo que está.
Ma i giovani non lavorano oggi come prima. Prima facevamo un lavoro pesante e camminavamo a piedi, ora si cammina in macchina, ora diventati tutti, sono nati in macchina, sono nati a cavallo, sono nati a sedia, diciamo. Ma allora erano nati in mezzo alla povera, per dire, hanno sacrificato le nostre mamme per sollevare i bambini, le famiglie.
Guarda, io ho fatto tanti lavori, quasi tutti i lavori che esistono. Andavo al contadino, sono andato in bicicletta, io a Guasilla, con 90 kg di inerzia, tutti i giorni. Partivo alle 5 di qui e arrivavo alle 8 a Guasilla. Passavo la merce e me ne venivo.
Guarda, io auguro sempre di obbedire all'anziano che sa per esempio una certa esperienza e già sa dove mettere le mani e non lo sa assassinare da nessuno. Lui deve governare se stesso, per esempio. Praticare con gente, per esempio, scusa, buona. Perché il proverbio dice chi va con zoppo impara a zoppicare.
I think when we're pursuing this journey of longevity, we have to find something to live for. We have to find our purpose, and our purpose might be to find our purpose. That might be our initial purpose. Otherwise, I think the pursuit of longevity is just a fancy way of saying, I'm scared of death.
If we were taught death and life is this beautiful story here on earth, the natural cycles, we would just the same not have as much fear and or shame around what death represents to us.
Δεν σκέφτηκα ποτέ μου το θάνατο. Αυτός δεν τον αποφεύγω με τίποτα. Και το Θεό μπάρβα να έχω. Άμα θα έρθει η ώρα μου, σκέφτομαι μόνο τι δουλειές θα κάνω.
I mean, I know I'm going where everyone else is going. Can I maximize the time? Either be it the time in the relationships with the people close to me, the food that I eat, the experiences that I have.
Are we running from death or are we chasing health? And this to me is a pivotal and imperative question to answer. I do not think that death is an avoidable tragedy. And that's how we treat it in the West. We treat death like it's an avoidable tragedy. But if we're looking at longevity as a means by which to optimize our life, to optimize our health, to start living more in accordance with nature, then this seems like a very worthwhile pursuit.
You know, one of the things people often don't realize is that we're biological organisms and that we have to follow the laws of nature. That we wouldn't feed our dogs things that we feed ourselves, right? But we feed them to our kids. And we try to ignore the limits of our human biology and not tend to the things that are going to create health.
I don't think longevity in and of itself is a core value. Quality of life is a core value. And that has many elements, one of which is health.
Es para vivir calidad de vida. Es lo que necesitamos.
It's really easy to rack up a score and say, look, I live till this number. But what does that mean?
empty years are empty years, right? And so were they filled with passion? Were they filled with time with family and loved ones? What was your purpose? What were you doing? Did you enjoy the sunshine? Did you move around like you wanted to? And so these types of things are way more important than this idea of longevity, just extending life for just that reason.
Our primary focus instead of longevity should be happiness, because that happiness is the key to longevity versus the opposite. Living longer won't make you happy, but being happy will allow you to live longer.
Who cares if I can extend a telomere if I don't smile, laugh, giggle, and enjoy every moment of my life every day?
The goal really in our life, when you look at everything we try to accomplish, is to try to be like a child. It's to try to be completely satisfied in your life. Know that your needs are going to be met. Have complete confidence in who you are. Be in love with who you are, what you look like, not wanting to change a thing. Look in the mirror and just enjoy yourself. Children do that. We're always trying to get back to that state of a child. When we get back to the state of a child, now that youthful glow, that joy, that laughter, that energy that attracts us to human anyway, is now all culminated within our body, and that truly is what propels us into longevity.
I hope you enjoyed episode 1 of the Human Longevity Project, as we took a deep dive into mitochondrial health. Mitochondria clearly play a primary role in the aging process by communicating with our microbiota and our DNA to control genetic expression. So the question is, how do we keep our mitochondria healthy? As this series progresses, you'll find out how lifestyle factors like diet, exercise, light, toxins, emotions, community, and purpose all affect mitochondria to impact your state of health and what you can do to live a happier, healthier, and more harmonious life. The health issues we're now facing are impacting our children like never before. And because of this, we've made it our mission to reduce the number of birth-related deaths worldwide. We're aiming to impact the lives of 1 million children. Over the next several days, you'll hear more about this mission and our plan to accomplish it, but we need your help. Your involvement, your voice, and your passion are critical. Please continue to spread the word by hitting the share button below and help us grow this movement. Together we can create a brighter future for all of us. Thank you.